The Prophecy Brothers in color. Starring Brother Man and Brother Champion. They are brothers. They are unorthodox. Tonight's guest, Mark Sutherland. Update.
Hey, good evening and welcome to the Prophecy Brothers. Everybody, I'm Brother Man, and joining us tonight is Mark Sutherland from London on the other side of the pond. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Absolute pleasure to be with you, Steve. And I'm wearing my glasses as a tribute, but I'm going to now take them off. Yeah. I'm now going to take them off. I have to do it.
I've got the bifocals, so I can read and do everything with the sunglasses.
I think I need to put mine on.
Well, Mark, it's funny. I was thinking about before we started here, the last time we spoke, and I said, let's check back in a week, and it's been 2 months. And There's a lot of stuff to happen, but I guess in Prophecy Brothers time, a week is like 2 months or something like that. But a lot of stuff's happened. There's an event, and just for everybody, we're going to be calling it the event to make sure that we don't get censored, because you know how those bots are out there, and it doesn't do us any good to get deleted or not have this show up in a suggestion. So we've had a major event worldwide go on here, Mark, and over here in the U.S., as I'm sure you're well aware, governments never let a good crisis go to waste. And as we've seen this event unfold and be a non-event in some cases, governments have doubled down and they've taken advantage of this. And so we'll talk a little bit about the states here too, but how is your government taking advantage of this crisis?
It's a very, very good question, Steve. I just want to put certain things in context. In regard to the event, on the 19th of March, and here is an exhibit, right? You may not be able to clearly see it, but I just wanted to say that this is a copy off a government website. And this particular piece of paper off a government UK website indicates the fact that this event was downgraded from a highly infectious disease to a not so highly infectious disease on the 19th of March. Then on the 26th of March, we went into lockdown. There's a correlation. So suddenly everyone's going, we're really worried about this event that of course has linked to, Event 201 in October, New York, of that event. And the important thing is to say, with whatever I'm saying, with whatever you're saying, is that people are really encouraged to go and do their own research. And as this event has unfolded, there's some incredible information that's coming out. So how, in one sense, we have to put a bit of history. We have to put a bit of context, because what has happened over here has been a clear influence of an event that's happened over where you are in regard to how President Trump has then reacted and how Boris Johnson has reacted. So let's just put this in a context now. So 12th of December, Boris Johnson then wins the parliamentary election and wins with 80 seats. That was the last time you and I had a conversation a couple of months ago when we discussed this. So he gets a clear majority of 80 seats across the country and manages to break through up north and in the Midlands where the seats have been Labour held for many, many years, such as Sedgley. I think Sedgley has always been in Labour hands, which is a very, very important thing to say. Suddenly becomes Conservative. So he burst through this wall. And there is a reason why I'm explaining this. So then on the 31st of January, and this is to put the event, never let a crisis go to waste, in context. On the 31st of January, we finally began our official leaving of the European Union, as we reflect on the fact that on the 23rd of June, 17,410,752 people, with a majority of over a million, voted out. You and I have discussed over the last few years on the wonderful occasions I've had the occasion to talk to you, is the fact that it took us 4 years nearly to get to the 12th of December. We are a democracy. You are a constitutional republic. No matter how many times that newscasters on your side of the pond keep saying this is a threat to our democracy, a threat to our democracy, the other programming, that they're also throwing into this event. You are a constitutional republic. Our democracy then was not adhered to in the fact that we spent over 4 years fighting our own parliament. Many members of parliament within the House of Westminster, the Palace of Westminster, are Remainers. A number of those Remainers, of course, lost their seats. The House of Lords, virtually to the man and woman, except for one that I'm aware of, which is Lord Rannoch, who is the UKIP Lord. They are virtually all Remainers to a man and a woman, including the bishops from the Church of England that sit in there, which is an incredible anomaly within our political system. On the 31st of January, we left. There was a lot of celebrating, to say the least, and we have until late December of this year to negotiate a trade deal with the EU. You're aware that that has started when we put in Article 50, which was built into the Lisbon Agreement, which is what you do as a nation. You hand Article 50 in, which says you give the rest of the EU a warning that you are planning to leave. But as you know as well as I do, my dear brother, they never, a bit like the Hotel California, I'm not going to recite the words because it's not good spiritually, but the concept you know of, which is you never leave. So the whole idea is that you go in and we never left. That in 1973, to recount a piece of history, when we joined the common market, we lost the sovereignty of this nation. And as certain things have unfolded, as we have found out, that is absolutely the case. Now, the unfortunate thing is that various people do not want to look at history. They do not want to look at the fact that in 1923, you could argue Jean Monnet, Alta seats on the League of Nations, it was always planned to be about monetary and political union. There was this plan. We go through the history of the Second World War. At some point, we can touch on that, which is fascinating. But it's fascinating in the fact that we, as we would say, as Bible-believing Christians, in this event, we are dealing with principalities and powers, as Ephesians 6 talks about. We are engaged in the biggest spiritual battle of our lifetime, and that God gave the people nations. We go back to looking at the Tower of Babel, Nimrod building a tower, and the whole history of Babylon and what that was all about, and the fact that we build a tower, we want to attack God in confusion, to confuse humanity, because he turned around and said, well, hold on a minute, if they're all going to get together and do this is not a good thing. So I'm going to give languages out. And as we know, as scripture says, Jesus returns to judge us individually, but to judge the nations.
Mark, I'd like to maybe back up here and maybe do a higher level view, a 10,000 foot view on I'm not sure what that'd be in kilometers or meters, but
I'm happy with miles. I'm happy with miles,
okay.
sir.
All right. But you brought up several good points here, and I think as I was thinking about our upcoming conversation today, we don't want to just preach to the choir. We want to make sure that we get the message out and wake other people up. Yeah. And I think there's something here about the nature of government that we have to say, whether it is with in the UK and Brexit, or if it's here in America. And our founders knew that government was a dangerous servant and a fearful master, if I got the quote right. And that was to keep government as limited as possible.
Yeah.
And like you said about that, they knew that you could check in but never leave. Once government gets its claws in something, and here's the concept: when they get it, it's hard to back out of that. It's hard, these with the event that these that the governors are getting in countries, it's going to be real hard backing that stuff out. Just like we saw with 9/11 when that unfolded, then there was all of these rules to keep us safe, all these laws. And we found out that they're being used against us. And as I'm talking here, I'm forgetting where I'm going with that, but I hope you understand and everybody understands what I'm saying, is that we really need to understand what the role of government is, and that is to be limited. And, the first thing I think with yours is to get your national sovereignty back, and then from there, individual liberty. And the devil is going to go where the power is. And so the more power you give to the government, that's where those principalities and powers are going to go.
I agree. And I think this was said the other night. And it's like I was in Dallas at the Watchman conference in March. And then when I flew back, within a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, President Trump then shut down flights from Europe, from the UK. And that just felt, if I'm honest with you, it felt like a total and utter sucker punch. Because when we were in March discussing it with dear friends there, suddenly thinking, well, hold on, what's gone on? The fact that the kind of things that we understand in this event now, where we discovered that the fact that in February, the World Health Organization, we should say, who are you? Because that's a way of pushing them back in their place, suddenly said, well, we're going to call this, C-19. That is what they then, these names coming up. We then discover that the man running the WHO was a member of the Tigray political party in Ethiopia, which your country, I think in 1990 or 92, then said that recognized them as a terrorist group. He has some humanitarian issues in regard to his behavior in Ethiopia that he needs to be accountable for. We then discover that the World Health Organization is collectivist progressive Marxism. We have then discovered that there is a massive vaccine big pharma push behind this massive push for, I would say, the Fifth Reich, as we have seen this whole beginning discussion of a global governance. And before anyone thinks that you or I are mad on this matter, we are not, because we can refer to a number of weeks ago when, Tony Blair, our ex-prime minister, who then stood down as prime minister in 2007, who won 3 elections for the Labour Party. But he had created something, Steve, that's very, very important. He created a mindset called the third way, a mindset of collectively bringing private and public partnership together. That is profoundly against the American Constitution, we can argue, because one of the reasons why I'm very privileged to have these discussions with you and many, many friends across the pond is because I am passionate about your nation, because I've tried to get my little pea brain around the fact that why the nation of the United States was founded, who founded it, what the Constitution actually means. So your piece of paper of 1787 September that is influenced by our Magna Carta, which is influenced by our Constitution of 1688, our common law 1688, 1689. I'm not an expert on that over here, and I need to become more of an expert over here, because we as the people have been pushed out of that and out of that understanding that our law, your laws, which have come from us, it's this whole thing of common law where things have evolved. In other words, it's common sense. So out of this common sense has grown a legal system. And what is happening? And just to remind people that in 1789 there was the French Revolution. You and I have discussed this before, which was without God, and then the 1787, the 1776, the fact that there was a revolution with God. But look at where the Constitution at that date is then written. Now, you and I and other people would criticize us for going, yes, but all the founding fathers weren't Christians. They were humanists, atheists, whatever. Okay, fine. We're not arguing with that. What we're saying is you're talking about representative government, for the people. We the people are in charge, and we the people are providing checks and balances, and we are asking the government to make sure that the borders are safe and to provide policing on our streets. But that's it. And what we're seeing is a massive overstep of that. So
well,
in
Mark,
regard to
I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but when you're
Go on.
talking about the French Revolution and the American Revolution, I think it comes down to you had even if some of the founding fathers were deists, they believed that the individual had rights from a creator.
Absolutely.
And I think the French government thought that your rights came from, or the French Revolution, your rights came from government. So I think we're getting down this. We're at a fork in the road where they're falling on either side of this, where they think their rights come from government, and us liberty-minded, freedom-loving, constitution-loving people know that our rights are inalienable and they come from God or Creator.
Absolutely, and you've said it absolutely brilliant. And let's remind ourselves where the fact that people like Hillary Rodham Clinton, the people like Obama, when they had far more power, when he was 44th president of the United States, believed that the Constitution evolves. It's a living body. Well, I've never known a piece of paper to live except when it was actually on a tree. That's where it's come from. It's inked in. If you look at the gap between 1776 and 1786 of 1787 of just over 20 odd years, you look at that time of evolve to work out and get this right, and people reflecting on, as you have said, big government. And this is the whole issue, because if we jump to our situation, and this is where we want to go into this whole thing of never let a good crisis go to waste. The EU is a socialist Marxist construct. There is no other answer to that. It is not democratic. When you've looked at the EU Parliament, the people there, it's a bit like, Congress suggests the laws to make. My own understanding of that, tell me if I'm wrong, within your country. So the EU is turning around and going, they can't suggest laws. It comes from the 25, 26 commissioners. It's edict. And the whole idea was to take more and more of the democracy away from each individual country without telling the people that that is what you were doing. Now, we knew that. Now, we could get into the fact that how much of the CIA were involved in creating the EU, because there is history there. There is stuff that we could then talk about and what's gone on. So the big crisis that has gone on that they are using is this, because we have a civil service. You have that phrase that's going on, which is the Obama holdovers, the people who have an allegiance to the Obama administration. There is a mindset within the Obama administration, within those liberal progressive collectivism, and I'm not saying it's not there now, maybe to some extent a little bit within certain administration now, but far less. The fact is that people then undermining the Constitution of the United States. Because if we then look at Hillary Rodham Clinton basing the whole of her PhD on Saul Alinsky, if we then look, 12 rules for radicals and all that, if we look at Obama being heavily influenced by that. So there's all of that collectivism thought going on. Over here, within our civil service, headed by a man called Mark Sedgley, we then, under Theresa May, had a top civil servant called Ollie Robbins, who was basically assigned by Theresa May, this is a bit of element of sarcasm, to turn around and go to negotiate on behalf of the EU how we as a country should be leaving the EU on the EU's behalf. That sounds a bit of a mouthful. What I'm trying to say is that in many ways they're not representing us as a nation state. So what's happening across the world is that we have got this nationalism v globalism fight. We have got this as an excellent interview that Alex Newman did the other night with a wonderful lady who has written a book called The 50 Hoaxes or Hoaxes, where she talked about, and I've forgotten the name, she talked about the fact that the fight is between globalism and Americanism, what America actually stands for. And what I have to say again is that the European Union is essentially socialist. That is what it is. It's socialist, it's Marxism. It's about centralized control, which was familiar because the fact is that the German Reich, the Third Reich, it's exactly the same. It was centralized control, and then it had little puppet governments running the countries it then invaded. And if various people over here then get highly insulted because it's like, are you calling the European Union the Third Reich? No, I'm calling it the Fourth Reich. Let's just say it how it is. And the fact that at the moment we see that Fifth Reich is trying to evolve, and we may come on to that. So what other is happening? What has actually happened over here is that Boris Johnson, who then led the charge to get us out of the EU, of course, with Nigel Farage, who had fought for years and years and years and years and years to push that whole policy forward. And then suddenly, over the last number of years, Boris Johnson became, suddenly took that upon himself and said, that's what we must do. Maybe saw the populist ticket. So he did that. And as you are maybe fully aware, he then didn't become prime minister, and he should have done. And Michael Gove, who's now in his cabinet, then stabbed him in the back, and they've sort of sorted all that out. Michael Gove's role is the Duchy of Lancaster. Maybe there's a phrase there that says, you keep your enemies close to you. Now, Boris Johnson became the prime minister, won the election. He then, a few weeks ago, became very ill with the event. And then his aide, Mr. Dominic Cummings. Now, Mr. Dominic Cummings is in the press at the moment. Dominic Cummings was part of Leave EU, played a very principal role in pushing to get us out of the EU, along with a very interesting and wonderful individual called Aaron Banks as an entrepreneur. They pushed that with Leave EU. Now, Dominic Cummings became very ill. Dominic Cummings then got in a car with his wife, with his child, left his home in London and drove 264 miles to County Durham, where his family have a farm, stayed in a separate building, did all this social distancing, did all this self-isolation, locking up yourself in a home, blah, blah, blah. And he went to where the childcare is. Now, the press have absolutely had a go at him. You've broken down lockdown rules and all this. Well, of course, the press over here, who are absolutely out of control, they are, to me, so left-wing, so full of Remainers. They are within the bubble. They do not, as far as I'm concerned, represent the average man, woman in the street. But then again, within London is a massive bubble. 60% of people voted to remain, 40% in London voted to leave. There was a clear majority, a mandate to leave. So we've had this huge democratic fight going on. And what has happened when Boris Johnson wasn't very well, there has been a push And the big push is this, is that, as you know, we are negotiating with Michel Barnier to have an EU deal. Now, let's just throw something in here. According to the Daily Express, it has been revealed that Mr. Michel Barnier could have been one of the instigators or allowing the establishment of the Wuhan laboratory in 2004, when he was the French foreign minister. Isn't that rather interesting? And you quite rightly said something in regard to the French Revolution. Let's remind ourselves this whole thing of, the Republic. We look at Nietzsche, we look at the whole thing of the philosophy, Carl Jung and all this, the philosophy that has come out of France, come out of Europe, which is anti-God, which is godless, which is atheist. Those principalities and spirits, we've got to remind ourselves that. We have to remind ourselves that we as a nation, during the Victorian times, we took the gospel around the world, powered by the Industrial Revolution. We were blessed with that when we smelted iron ore, I think in Derby around about 1701, round about that time. And then we led on to the massive Industrial Revolution, because my own understanding of this is that Oliver Cromwell then allowed the Jewish people back into our nation on the quiet. And as the Bible says, if you bless my people, I will bless you. If you curse my people, I will curse you. And I think that's in Genesis 12. All of those factors. So, Steve, sorry, would you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I was, you said something earlier. To the average person, let's say the average person, they're like, Mark, this is, this is real interesting, or, I'm not into politics. How does this affect me individually? And what I'm trying to say is, how do we get across to people to tell them how this is affecting them individually if they just don't think that this is a big deal? The liberals, for example, because they think that this stuff is good. How do we sell this to them? Because we have to reach out to the other side that, are genuine, that just aren't haters, that, just need to kind of see how this affects them. We need to change some of the hearts and minds of that. How do we do that?
Well, we do it with dialogue. I mean, there's a very, very dear friend of mine on your side of the pond, a friend of mine called David Summerall has been running an organization called Stop Hate since 1992, believe it or not, where and he is conservative, but where you are trying to reach across to liberals and trying to have a dialogue which is not offensive, is trying to say to people, look, you live in the greatest nation in the world. Look at the history of it. Look how it's founded. Look at its principles. Ideally, all I can say is, Steve, that through much prayer that we must undertake and looking for those opportunities to have a conversation, we've got to try and dialogue. But from your experience, I know from my experience, that sometimes that dialogue just doesn't happen because we're trying not to be rude. People are just abusive. People don't want to know. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because the bread and circuses on your side of the pond have shut down. The bread and circuses on this side of the pond have shut down. I have had a number of conversations with people who I've said, what do you think what's going on? And then I have, honestly, I'm not saying I'm an amazing preacher, but my priority is to turn around to people and say, if you don't know Jesus, sort that out now, period. I make no apology for that whatsoever. And in fact, in many ways, really trying to ramp that up with people that I may not have had the opportunity to say that. The Bible talks about the fact that, Ephesians lays out, we are to put on the full armor every single day, right? We cannot assume anything. I know for a fact on your side of the pond, and I've been very criticized for this here, on your side of the pond, there are a number of many ministers, church pastors in your churches up and down the land that will not talk about politics from the pulpit. If at all, they will not engage. You see, my own understanding of that in the revolution of 1776 you had 3% that were fighting the redcoat British. It's never got over the fact that we had redcoats and would just be marching through the woods. I mean, no wonder we got picked off by you guys so easily. Just never makes sense to me. But in sort of open field, maybe that was more our game, you know. But the fact that then it was backed up by 4%. Trying to go back to your question, all I can say is that we have to engage in prayer. We have to speak out. We have to reach across the aisle all the time. I mean, one of the big things to me, and chatting to people on your side of the pond and other friends, is that whole essence of when was civics stopped being taught in your schools? Was whether that was 30 years ago, 35 years ago? When was it stopped? Singing the national anthem, singing the Star Spangled Banner, pledging allegiance to the flag, to the country, right? Now, of course, and I'm not one of those people, but I'm glad he's in there. I'm not saying he's perfect. Of course he's not. I'm not saying that it's a true, maybe does he passionately believe 100% in the Constitution or the rest? Do I wish that it was Ron Paul when he was running? Of course I do. But at the end of the day, it's people actually discussing the Constitution, your history, why people should be passionate about that. And what upsets me, and I know it upsets you, is when we converse with people and find out that they don't have an opinion, Steve. They don't have an opinion. And I have just seen this played out with the whole, and this is what I was going to say, the whole thing with Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, because the way the press has gone for people, the way the press has gone for the government and gone, well, there aren't enough PPE, there aren't enough masks, there aren't enough there. Actually, there are. Whether people need them, no, they don't, and that's another thing. But the way that this group of people are going, well, we want to push the Brexit extension. If we push the extension, we have until the 30th of June to say to Michael Barnier, we're going to have an extension. No, we're not. And if we said we'd have an extension, then we would then be tied in for another 7 years into the EU budget. Now, I care about that. A number of people care about that in this country. Is that going to be clearly explained in our mainstream media? No. Was it clearly explained what is actually going on in the fact that we lost our sovereignty? You and I, we can go through that, etc. So, in other words, that comes back to when you're talking about engaging with people that may not agree with us. You're coming out with facts. We're trying to come out with facts, and one way is to try and say, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Do you think that the Federal Reserve is a public or a private body? Well, it must be a public body. No, it's a private bank. Do you think there's any money in there? Well, of course, there must be loads. No, there isn't. There are printing presses. Oh, is there gold that backs all this up? Well, there should be. When did we come off the gold standard? When did you come off the silver standard? Why does this matter? Because this whole thing of control of money supply. Then here's the big one. Here's the big one, Steve. And I pray I've got this right. If you say to people, is the CDC a public or a private body? My own understanding of this is that the CDC is a private body. It is not public.
Yeah, I saw something today. I don't know if you shared that. Yes. That's the first time I had thought about it, but I'm glad you shared that. That's something worth researching.
Because it's Robert Kennedy. Now, you've been so gracious to say that. I had another very close friend of mine who said, and I'm going to read something that backs this up. I had a very, very close friend of mine who turned around and said, Mark, I didn't know that. Now, this lady is informed, right? So I just want to read something. Now, this is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This amazing Polly in Canada also pointed this out. This is why I got onto it. Experts of public health from 10 African countries visited the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, by the invitation of the Center for Global Public Health, of Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 10 African experts of public health from Ghana, Senegal, blah, 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 visited the Wuhan. They learned about the laboratory's construction process, functional layout, key operation areas, blah, 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 blah. The CGPH was established in 2016 with the main responsibility of achieving China's global health strategy, implementing the National Public Health Aid Mission, and planning and managing international public health cooperation projects. Through dispatching experts, technical cooperation, here we go, the CGPH has been working in the following areas, supporting the construction of Africa CDC. If it's a public body inside America, it would not be building a body of a public American body in Africa, would it? But if it's a private body, it would be building this. Yeah? Is that a fair point, Steve? Now, let's move on. Since its establishment, the CG has managed and implemented foreign aid mission assigned by the National Health and Family Planning Commission and Ministry of Commerce, as well as international cooperation projects funded by the United Kingdom, Department of International Development, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I rest my case. I also want to say that my taxpayers' money has been used through the Department of International Development, DFID, to fund that. DFID, Gordon Brown, when he was Prime Minister, because he, went up to Hillary Rodham Clinton and Bill, shook their hands and went all celebrity gaga, ended up giving my taxpayers' money to the Clinton Foundation. Andrew Mitchell, I think, when he was in as a conservative, Andrew Mitchell, and this is very interesting, isn't it? I know how passionate a constitutionalist you are. I know that. And I love it, and I respect that. And you, of course, talk about the bird joined by the same wings. They're exactly the same. There's an element of that here, because Andrew Mitchell, then, according to the Daily Mail, a number of years ago, is then responsible for handing taxpayers' money again over to the Clinton Foundation. Now, this is all relevant as it's layers upon layers upon layers. I'm delighted that I have been able to raise a point that says, look at the CDC, look at NIAID, look at the fact that Fauci, Dr. Fiasco, as L.A. Marzulli calls him, which I think is brilliant, has been involved with 5 administrations. Now, we go back with what he has been doing. 2014-15, he hands over $3.75 million to the Wuhan laboratory, right? We then have Barnier, 2004, establishing the Wuhan laboratory. The other thing about Barnier is this whole thing of being involved in negotiations, as Batailleur Books Eurabia talks about, in regard to massive people movement, in regard to, at the Barcelona Agreement, the fact that there was linking the Europe to start to look towards Islamic Arabic countries to allow that people group to come into Europe. Batailleur's book, Eurabia, lays that out. Barnier is involved in all that. So it's layers and layers and layers, principalities and powers. Here is another illustration of this, my dear friend. Darwin comes out with his book, Whole Issue of Evolution. He had someone that was called, I believe it's called Henry Huxley, who was his right-hand man, who was his bulldog to push his theories of evolution. Henry Huxley's grandchildren, Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley, I believe, Brave New World. Look at that, the influence, the spiritual influence. Then we look at Brave New World. We then go back to the 1930s and we take Elon Musk, and then we look at Elon Musk's grandfather, who in Canada, I believe, was head of the whole sort of technocracy, as Mr. Woodward talks about in Technocracy News, head of that whole technocracy society, that thinking. Look at how this goes from generation to generation. We then go back to Margaret Sanger and we go back to eugenics. And this is really, really important, where it refers to this event. It refers to, as we look to the Frankfurt School, we look to cultural Marxism. So let's go back to Margaret Sanger. Let's go back to the bait and switch of, you know, the Democratic Party accusing the Republicans of starting the Ku Klux Klan when it was on the other side, of starting the NRA, and then understanding that the National Rifle Association was started to equip Black Americans, and I don't like the hyphenated, but I'm just saying that everyone is an American in America, as if we take the Black Americans to actually defend themselves from white racists, Ku Klux Klan. This whole thing of bait and switch and understanding our history. Maybe that is, when you start to talk about those issues, maybe that is where we can draw our liberals in. But let's go back to the spiritual dimensions here and what effects this has on here. Other people greater than me, like Greg Reese on InfoWars, done a fantastic little film on this. So you go back to Bill Gates. You go back to Bill Gates' dad, a banker. You go back to Bill Gates' dad, who then sat on the board of Planned Parenthood, or maybe the chairman of Planned Parenthood. The inference as well that Bill Gates' mother then had links with IBM. We then take IBM, we go back further, and we look at the fact that IBM was involved in eugenics because it created the tattoos, the punch card system in regard to recording, sadly, and finding out who was Jewish, pulling them out, and then making sure in that Germanic autocratic organization that these people were then murdered in Auschwitz, Dachau, and every other concentration camp, and Cyclone B then coming down into these cells and then killing them. And it was then they were then became part of the cartel of the military industrial complex of Germany, of IG Farben. And that was run, I understand, by the head of IBM from New York. There is a eugenics history. Look at how, this is the point I'm trying to make, how these things pass on. So Mr. Bill Gates and Melinda Gates of the Gates Foundation, who have handed in recent times 282 million odd pounds, dollars to Imperial College, where Neil Ferguson works, where Neil Ferguson comes up with the models saying there's going to be 500,000 people that are going to die in the UK. No, there's going to be 250,000. Oh, excuse me. I'm now going to revise that down to 20,000. Those figures come out on the 19th of March. We downgrade it from a highly infectious disease, and then we go into lockdown when the figures should immediately have said, well, hold on a minute, these figures don't add up. We're not going into lockdown. This is ridiculous. Those models were then used by Birx and Fauci, Tony and Debbie, to walk into President Trump's office and going, 2 million people are going to die. Fauci on the 24th of March in the New England magazine turns around and says, I think it's only going to be as high as a highly infectious flu pandemic in America. Let's put things in context. You are a population of 330 million people. If 80,000 people are infected by flu, if anyone dies, that's awful. But put it in that context. We over here are 68 million people, and we have a population of 20,000. I'll just say this, Steve. But look at how Bill Gates then evolves. He then works out how to put viruses in the world via people's computer. He then has an absolute obsession with population control, with vaccinations, and this whole essence of what is in the vaccines. The reason why, and I'm going to say this and make myself very, very unpopular with some. The reason why the CDC has been in such trouble, the reason why people like Judy Mikovits to me, who have been in serious trouble with Dr. Fauci, who he kicked out, blah, 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 because they've revealed and started to discuss, along with incredible people like Sherry Tenpenny and others, the dangers of vaccinations and what it actually does. Now, we haven't got time, and if I'm honest, because I don't feel like I'm a medical person, but I'm trying to read this whole issue of germ theory. But the whole thing spiritually, we are dealing with, to me, population control. When someone like Gates in 2015 speaks at a TED talk and goes, well, at the moment, the world population is like, 9 billion or whatever, approaching that. And with various things, with vaccines and all the rest, we can bring that down to by maybe, by 15%. Well, what are you doing? What are you actually inferring? That you're going to bump all these people up? But look at the history, the lineage here, spiritually, where it's gone from one within certain generations and decades, and to me, within Hitler, of exterminating people, getting rid of the Jewish people, what they did, just with that, let alone all the other millions that were killed in the war, you had this experimentation of how to push people, how to control people. You then had the experimentation within Auschwitz, IG Farben running its own factory, paying for the experiments of Mengele. Hell's Kitchen, a fantastic book, or Hell's Cartel, talks about that, and other books. So all of these things need to be put into the mix. I know we're discussing history, and I'm absorbed by history. I love history, but maybe that's where we could start to get our liberal friends in. Sorry,
Yeah.
Steve.
And I think asking questions, you're like me. I mean, you go out, you get on a roll, you want to go. But, if somebody's listening here and they're saying, well, yeah, Mark, all these examples of these people, well, these are capitalists. And that's why we need socialism. But what we're finding is if you backtrack to what Mark said earlier, it's a public-private relationship. It's the merging of the two, crony capitalism.
Yes.
All you're doing by making the government structure bigger, those capitalists come in and use that. And that's what makes these people dangerous, is they merge with the government. And they have the power and the force of the government behind. So it's going to be us as individuals. It's the people. We get the situation in the government that we want, and we've got to get that the notion that a limited government is the government that governs the best, or the government that governs the least governs the best. Put it that way. And we need to understand that, because you brought up something here too. There's a good book that I've mentioned on our show in years past. It's None Dare Call This Conspiracy by Gary Allen.
I've got it.
But he posed a question in there: why do the socialists, or why are billionaires always calling for more taxes? And that's because they have foundations. And the foundations, they don't have to pay taxes, and they run all this stuff. So of course they don't care about taxes. It's these foundations. They've used the government to get special privileges, and we need to have that understanding that we don't want socialism, which is more government, because that's the con game, and they're just going to use it to enslave us. So
it's very interesting when they turn around and say, oh, they're capitalists. Well, capitalism has brought more people out of poverty than any other system.
True capitalism.
True capitalism. That's the other thing. This is the other thing, Steve, because this is where we are talking from as Bible believing Christians, as it's our attitude. So if we're employing people, it's how we're employing them. We want to pay them, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, treat them with respect and all the rest. This is the whole thing. It's then looking at how that person, that entrepreneur, is conducting himself or herself, how they go around doing that. And then it comes down to the classic. If you take Karl Marx, for our Engels and all that kind of thing, Marx is living off other people in a sort of fairly richest lifestyle when he was over here, but he doesn't want the proletariat having a very nice lifestyle. And then suddenly the whole subject of Lenin, Marx, the whole Lenin being paid by bankers to then go over to Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution. That there's a fantastic book that talks about that. And Mike, our dear friend Mike Spalding was talking about that in a recent interview with Bishop Larry and all the rest and others, where we unfold all this. We see how the banks, that actual abuse. It goes back to the fact that you didn't really have a personal tax system until the Federal Reserve then comes about, and it's how you traded with tariff barriers across borders and this whole thing of philanthropy. And what you've said about the foundations is fascinating and absolutely right, because there's one foundation that needs to be blown a massive hole on it, which is the Clinton Foundation. We look all the money that they took in regard to building up her campaign to actually win the election in 2016, which he thought she had an absolute divine right to, right, which she does not. So we look at that. Over here, we need to be studying the Blair Foundation and what that does and all this kind of thing. And there is all these think tanks. We have got a major problem over here, Steve, and I might have touched on this. And this is where, in regard to this, I call it an attempted coup, an attempted way to derail Brexit again, is because you've got a collectivism, progressive mindset where your judiciary has been weaponized under Obama. The IRS were weaponized under Obama. Seems that various certain people at the high echelons of the FBI, Comey for argument's sake, struck and that weaponized under the FBI. We're not saying that everyone within the FBI behaves in the way that they do, not at all. But there are certain things that are being weaponized and then weaponized against the American people, where these people have a globalist thinking instead of an Americanism, instead of thinking for their nation and what their nation actually represents and how it was founded. And they've all benefited from that. We over here have a major problem. And we have a major problem with a group called Common Purpose. It was started by a lady called Julia Middleton. I might have touched on this before, but it's relevant again now. It never seems to go away. And an incredible guy called Brian Gerrish, who 3 days a week broadcasts with his colleague Michael on UK Column. And it's very, very good news, very good website. Now, Brian Gerrish in 2011 came across Common Purpose. Common Purpose is a neuro-linguistic management training body. Now, let's put another really important fact on the table. The National Health Service in this country is the third biggest employer in the world. And one of the key things politically, is the fact that suddenly the National Health Service is such a big political football over here that in many ways what happened in regard to our lockdown is that Boris Johnson, President Trump were both doing herd immunity, but they're both going along that line, which was a sensible thing, which should have happened. You could have even argued, according to something that I've read, that late October, November, even though that may go against, we're trying to work out when this virus came about, that in Italy, that 25% of Italians had already had the event. And that actually what happened was the doctor reported that to their equivalent of Dr. Fiasco, who turned around and said, no, this is how we're reporting it. The numbers are far worse than this, da-di-da-di-da. So this whole thing of, everyone had gone to a private meeting of the WHO, which America seems to give a lot of money to. We seem to give a lot of money to, but I didn't ask to give it to a Marxist body. And they'd all decided to say, well, this is how we're going to say it. In time, we're all going to fiddle death certificates. Yes, I did say that. And we're going to say that everyone has died from the event where they haven't. And in Italy, as it's all coming out, where they've said that sadly people have died, maybe it's only 25% in regard to this event, but the fact that they've had other illnesses that affect them, etc., etc. And there are other issues, pollution, if some of them have taken a flu vaccine and lowering their immunity. So going back to common purpose in this country, common purpose then, Julia Middleton, it grew out of like a community. She was influenced by the community action of America. Doesn't that sound familiar? Acorn, Obama. So this whole thing of a new linguistic programming, where she ran a lot of management courses within the NHS, within the BBC and other type of bodies, within the civil servants service of this country, and began to get people to think beyond a post-nation construct, a bit like Trudeau does in Canada, another complete and utter nightmare that needs to be kicked out of being Prime Minister of that country. And I will say that, and I can say that, looking back on what he's doing there disastrously. So they then think outside authority. You're encouraged to think outside the box. And this is this whole thing of having, to me, a federalist thinking within the European Union. Now, I'm not against individual countries within the European Union. I love all the individual nations. You know, within the United States of America, your United States, the 50-odd states who all have differences and traditions and all the rest. That's fantastic. You know, having been to Italy a few times, and there's this wonderful pizza festivals and all this kind of thing. Fantastic. Within Germany, of course, you've got beer festivals, other food and all the rest. All differences to be celebrated. The thing is, the European Union, we want countries to work together. As we've found out in this event, the countries have not worked together. Very interesting with what's happening in Germany in regard to the German court have actually said that the European Court of Justice, you know, they've actually overruled that. They've overruled various things in regard to pushing money lending and various things that they just think are going to put their country in jeopardy because they're going to have to pay for it. So what's happened here, coming back, I do apologize, in regard to common purpose, it means that within our civil service, it has got this mindset, to me, of not putting this country first. It's got a mindset of putting federalism, this whole thing of the European Union first. And that's why, I mean, it's shocking to think, because the whole European model was dividing, you know, the European Union into, I think, 11 regions. We look at us as a nation. We should actually only have one parliament. Maybe we should move that to the middle of the country, because Scotland has its own assembly. Wales has its own assembly. The English, where's the English own assembly? But they turn around and say that that's the Westminster Parliament. Well, that's interesting because in the past, under the Blair regime, where you had members of Parliament who were Labour, who were from Scotland, sitting in Parliament because they were elected to sit in the Palace of Westminster, but they were making decisions as people from Scotland on English political issues. But I could not go to the Scottish Parliament and influence that. So this whole thing of the West Lothian question came up. So what am I coming to? I'm coming to this, that if you use neuro-linguistic programming to change people's minds, if you are within the London bubble, if you have totally immersed within the BBC, created the huge bubble, just to remind everyone, the BBC costs every single taxpayer in this country and who wants to use a television £157 a year. It's taxed. It's not privately financed. We need to get rid of the BBC license fee, because I just feel it's the biggest propaganda joke going. It's appalling. And yes, I'm going to say that. So the whole thing of, you have then trained people, to me, to think in a collectivist, progressive mindset, to think outside the border, to think outside your boxes. So in other words, when we see Turkey deliberately sending immigrants into Greece and causing the chaos on various islands there, then they will travel through Europe. Then as it's just been decided that France is going to take various immigrants that go through Greece, go to France, and then next minute they get on a plastic boat and go over the channel and try and enter our country. And so we don't seem to have control of our borders at the moment. And as I've said a number of times, any country that does not have control of its borders, have control of its own money supply, have control of its own laws, and have control of its own language is no longer a country anymore. So when you've got civil servants who have that kind of mindset that are looking to Europe, got very, very nice pensions, regularly going to Europe, isn't it nice, where they have their own private shopping malls for people that work within the European Union and all this. And yes, it's true. And they have pensions that I could only dream of. That is how they then are thinking. They then criticize us for, being little England and all this kind of thing, and turning around and saying, well, look, we're not against immigration. We just want that to be legal. So, and plus, we haven't bought into these things. The whole thing of the migration compact was not explained to us as the British people. And of course, it's embedded within the United Nations, which means that people can move everywhere. That's why they're very cross with you. They're very cross with the fact that you want tight borders. Your president is not against immigration. He just wants that to be legal immigration to people to be able to come to America for the American dream and work hard in that regard.
Right. You want to know who's coming in your country. You want to know who's coming in your house. You just don't leave your door open and unlocked and just have anybody walk in. Same principle with the country. There's property rights. Yeah, no, I agree. And there's some libertarians that are for open borders, but I just think, it comes to a property right issue, and whose country is it? Do you have a country or not? So, Mark, we need to wrap up here. Any final thoughts or anything that you want to say before we take off?
Absolutely. I'm going to say this is that our priority is getting people into the lifeboat of salvation through Christ. That is our priority. That is our number one priority, and having those discussions as much as we can, because this event, I want things to go back to normal. There is that concern when we see the 2020 Economic Forum, we see that website, we listen to the incredible Bishop Salom has been talking about these issues, this whole planning. But going back, we need to be praying about this. We need to be reaching out to each other. We need to be encouraging each other, because I can tell you from my own experience over here, it is pretty isolating, because it's isolating when people do not have the same mindset to see what's going on. If America goes down, then the whole of Western civilization is finished. It's what is the Judeo-Christian culture basis. It's what it's actually based on. We need to personally stop, having arguments about how many of the founding fathers were atheists, deists, and whatever. And can we just unite in praying and pushing back where we can, and bringing people facts and educating them about what is going on, trying to do it as best as we can, as polite as we can. No, I believe that we're seeing the beginning of the book of Revelations unfold, as far as I'm concerned. If someone says to me, are we in the end times? I'm going, yes. And all those things. So our priority is salvation, Steve. From there, let's just pray for those opportunities to talk to people about what's going on.
Amen. Yeah, we're not getting, no matter whether it's from the event or anything else, we're not getting it out of this life alive. So we have to ask ourselves, or ask others, where are you going to when you die? And if you're not sure, you better accept Jesus Christ as
Absolutely.
your Savior.
Absolutely.
And I think that would solve a lot of things. I think people would, it just would solve a lot of problems if they just start following the Lord and the Bible and the principles there. So, well, thanks again, Mark, for checking in with us and letting us know what's going on and the other side of the pond. This is a strange event, as it's worldwide, and governments, they work on fear. We've always got to be afraid of something. They come in and they break our legs, and then they offer us a crutch and acting as the good guy. And so we've got to pray for discernment, and as we talk to people too, let's not make this, it's not about left, right, conservative, liberal. It's about, just like we said, where are you going to go when you die? Is this the kind of life that you want to live? Do you want to give up all your happiness, your hobbies, your sports, your, music events, and get people questioning it. So, well, we will see you the next time on the Prophecy Brothers, and we'll see you again soon. Mark, thanks everybody for watching. God bless.
Thank you, my friend. God bless. Bye.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel.